right.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to ask you all to stay on mute, and I'm going to turn our program over to DeAna.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April session of the Seasoned Sisters Speak series. My name is DeAna Wilkins, and it is an honor to serve as your co-moderator tonight with seasoned sister Delores Robertson. This evening, our guest panelists will engage in a candid conversation around the topic, African American women, making our voices heard in corporate America. First, we have Mrs. Rasheeda S. Liberty. Mrs. Liberty serves as a senior finance leader, steering the recruitment strategy for Amazon's chief financial officer and executive team. She is a recognized corporate leader with over 28 years of experience in delivering results for Fortune 100 companies. She is also the 25th International Grand Basileus of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. In this role, she will lead the organization as it celebrates its 100th year in 2022. Mrs. Liberty is lauded by her sorority for her stewardship of the organization's mission of enhancing the quality of life for women and their families in the US and globally. Mrs. Liberty is a member of numerous organizations, including Top Ladies of Distinction, NAACP, Finance Executive Networking Group, and Jack and Jill of America. Mrs. Liberty, can you give a wave? Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Jade Jackson. Jade Jackson, a Chicago native, graduated cum laude from the University of Missouri, Columbia, with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration. Upon graduation, she began work as a Treasury management sales analyst in the banking industry. She is responsible for preparing financial models and analysis that are used to help her clients both manage their liquidity and discover and resolve any possible inefficiencies in their current cash management process. Jade serves on the board of the Black Heritage Employee Research Group, where she is an event coordinator and a content creator for the Racial Wealth Gap series, a series that explores the fundamental building blocks to achieving financial freedom and generational wealth. Jade, can you give a hand wave, please? Thank you. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Iris Cumberbatch. Dr. Cumberbatch is a communications, marketing, corporate philanthropy, and government relations executive whose work centers on building bridges between organizations and their stakeholders. Currently, she is the Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Affairs at ECMC Group in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dr. Cumberbatch earned a PhD in Learning and Change from Antioch University, an MBA from Queen's University of Charlotte, an advanced certificate in mass communications from the University of Manchester, UK, and a bachelor's degree in journalism and communication from Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Cumberbatch, can you give a hand wave? Thank you. Thank you, ladies, for joining us this evening, and I will turn it over to my co-moderator, Delores Robertson.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Many of you have been with us before, and it's good to see all of you again. We have probably a few new people here, and I welcome all of you with open arms. Now, as most of you know, we're here for a casual conversation among Black women. We're here to talk about how we learn, how we grow, how we lead. Now, three of the ladies on this panel have experience in different stages of their lives and in their careers, but in all of that, it still makes them very successful. And we can learn from each and every one of them. We will focus tonight on our insightful discussion that we titled African American Women Making Our Voices Heard in Corporate America. Now, in order for us to break this down into components, because we only have 1 hour, there's one word that we found that has a commonality, and that word is credibility. Credibility. There's professional credibility. We determined there is performance credibility, and finally, interpersonal credibility or competence. So I'm going to open up to the three ladies who are going to discuss their career paths and how they have made and are still making their voices heard. They are accomplished Black women. So let's start with professional credibility. Now, that's sort of not a hard definition or a word to put a definition to, but sometimes when we talk about professional credibility, we talk at minimum education, experience, maybe even skill sets. So therefore, the first question to our ladies is, what barriers have you experienced? And I'll start with, of course, Madam Grand, then Jade, and then Dr. Cumberbatch.
I will say, really, as I've been in corporate America or in a finance capacity with a predominantly white male audience for quite a bit. Grew up in Wisconsin, went to high school with the same demographics, and definitely in college, graduated as the only African-American female accounting student or graduate. Went on to MBA, same demographics. Went to the job place, same demographics. And so what I would say is what I experienced initially definitely has shifted as I grew in my career. But initially, the main barrier was solving the question of what are you doing here? And why should I hire you? Why should I trust you? And I always was told that you're going to have to perform, right? You're going to have to build that trust in those things. But the biggest barrier, I think, was solving the why you and do you really have what it takes? That was really a significant barrier. The other piece to the puzzle was I was fairly young. I looked a little younger at that time. And so I remember being a director at 28 years old and a guy coming to me and calling me kiddo that reported to me who had been with the business for 30 years. So he had been with the business longer than I was on this earth. And he kept referring to me as kiddo. And so I knew right away I had to exercise strength at that time and kind of make sure that he knew that I was the leader and that it was a respected position and it had nothing to do with my age. So there was a lot of age barriers. And then I think women, just naturally, we're a little more passionate. We're viewed as softer in negotiations and things like that. But I found that that was not the case coming from a finance background. Numbers were very black and white. And one of the things I wanted to do is make sure that I held teams to a certain level of accountability to performance and execution because I had numbers and numbers didn't lie. So I would say those were probably the biggest barriers, coming in very young, feeling like I needed to prove myself as to why I needed to be in the room. And then also making sure that I could showcase my skill at a high level.
Thank you. And Jade, tell us about what barriers you believe that you have faced in your career at this point.
Yeah. So as DeAna mentioned earlier in my intro, I started my career in 2019 when I was pursuing my undergraduate degree. I held a job in accounting and I had various internships. So this isn't my first experience in the corporate world. However, I am still relatively new to working in corporate full time. So with that being said, I don't think that I've encountered many barriers in getting my voice heard at this stage in my career. But I also believe the definition of getting your voice heard is relative to the person and what stage you're in your career. So for me, it means, do people listen to me when I have an idea? Do I feel like a valuable member of my team? Do I have a say-so on the type of projects that I take on? And I do believe that I have that in my current position. But I think it's funny, something that Rasheeda mentioned is, her being relatively young when she first started and being called kiddo. That actually happened to me a couple weeks ago. When I was on a Zoom call with a colleague of mine, somebody who had the same job. But yeah, he thought it was appropriate to call me kiddo. But I wouldn't consider it a barrier. I deal with it, but I try to, keep pushing forward despite, other people's opinion about my age. So yeah, I think that's interesting that you mentioned that.
And Dr. Cumberbatch, what can you add to this this particular topic?
So I'm the oldest and the most senior part of this panel. And so, I have a longer period to look back over when I think about the journey that has brought me to where I am today. And how being able to have my voice heard has changed over time. And so I would, as I think about my career as a whole, I would say having my voice heard and being able to be heard, as Madam Grand noted, has really varied over the course of my career. And I would break it down into sort of three categories of barriers. One was around what I knew at different points in my career. And so, a barrier early in my career was just experience, right? And having the credibility of experience. But as time has gone on, both my education and my experience have grown. And as they've grown, my ability to have my voice heard has also grown. The second category is around what you do, right? So again, going back to that idea of performance credibility. And again, over my career, my ability to have my voice heard has grown as my expertise has grown and as my reputation has grown. So what I do has played a really big role in my ability to increase having my voice heard over time. And then the third category would be who you know. And, having proximity to people in power aids you in having your voice heard. So as my career progressed, and I went, I moved up the chain and I started working for the CEO. Just having that proximity to power and having someone who, in essence, vouches for you really, really increases your ability to be heard. That gives you credibility too.
And while we're still a little bit on the subject of professional credibility, I guess I can summarize it a little bit, and feel free, ladies, to chime in. But I hear you're talking about growth, and growth by way of your expertise and your knowledge set, as well as your reputation and the people you meet along the way. All of that seems to encompass your professional, well, we'll call it professional credibility, but professional growth.
Absolutely, and that helps to remove barriers to have your voice heard.
Thank you. And so we will segue over to the second category that I brought up in the beginning, and that's performance credibility. And now sometimes I think some of these categories or subsets somehow, cross each other, and which is okay. Nothing is set in stone in any category. So maybe performance credibility could be something described as accountability, or how well do you do your job? So DeAna, would you like to move forward with that?
Yes, so the second question for our panelists, what tactics have proven to be successful in making your voices heard at the table? So once again, what tactics have proven to be successful in making your voices heard at the table? So if we can start with Jade, Madam Grand, and then Dr. Cumberbatch.
Okay. Thank you, DeAna. I would say that I am still on that journey to making my voice heard. But if I had to outline some tactics that I use in that journey, I would say the first one is performance. Just making sure that I'm doing my job and going above and beyond to handle the responsibilities that are required of me, and being proactive about it, so that people trust me and that I build rapport, that I'm a good team member, easy to work with, and that I'm also someone that's teachable, because again, I am still on a journey. The second I would say is building my network. So at this stage in my career, I am not in a position to make any huge decisions. However, like Iris mentioned earlier, I make sure that I identify who those people are and align myself with them and build relationships with people in general, inside and outside of my team, so that my voice is heard when I have something to contribute. Now, I make sure that these relationships are genuine and that I'm not just seeking mentorship or working relationships because of who someone is or because they're in a position of power, but making sure that we can relate in some kind of way to each other and be valuable to each other. Third, I would just say something that's worked for me is just making my intentions for my career path clear and known up front. By doing this, I have been able to connect with people along my career path, and my allies and my manager have been able to identify different steps that I can take to get to that point. And I think that it also shows that I am a bit ambitious and that I care about the work that I'm doing. So those are the tactics and the strategies that I use.
Yeah, I think I love hearing Jade's story because she's so new in her career, and the fact that she's on a journey that I would say at her point in her career, I had to learn. I stumbled a little bit. So in sharing my journey, I think it is the things I learned are exactly what Jade is doing, and she's doing it early. So I just think that's great. I just want to comment that she's on her way. Keep that name in mind. Um, the first thing I think was really for me, understand. I came in with a lot of confidence, right, from the things that I had accomplished, and I think getting knocked back in the first opportunity where I knew I was the most qualified candidate, I think that kind of put me in my place. And I didn't have, it took that confidence and that wind out of me a little bit where I said, well, maybe I didn't perform well, or maybe I'm not good enough, right? And I almost became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I was in commercial banking for a while and was doing lending deals for small businesses. And I didn't believe in going to lunch with the team. I don't want to hang around them. I got work to do. Well, I learned there was a lot of things going on at those lunches that I needed to be a part of. And so now I understand the power of network. And I love that both Iris and Jade shared this, that the power of network. Well, expanding that network a little more, I understand that there's a power of sponsorship, not mentorship. I heard a statement on a call I was on the other day that said, we Black women are over mentored and underfunded. So you can keep handing me a mentor, but I need a sponsor. And I need a sponsor to have a voice at the table when they're talking about my next role, my development, the things that someone that would vouch for me. I also know the power of having a hall file monitor, the person who's just going to keep it real with you and say, you're doing a really good job, but man, there's a lot of people behind you that are not really behind you. They're working really hard, but they're not really inspired by your leadership. And so it took me a while to learn that as a very young leader, that I thought the what was most important, but the how is just as important. And then I would say the last thing, and I shared this story before, when that opportunity came up when I was more mature in my career, where I knew I was qualified for the job, they said, no, we're going to go external for it. And this particular company had invested thousands of dollars in me. They had thrown the golden handcuffs at me. And if you know what that means they're giving you a lot of money. And so you're attached to that financial gift. And I realized that my gift was coming from somebody else. It wasn't the job that I was employed by. So when they told me they wouldn't give me the opportunity, the more mature leader, the leader that Jade is today, right? The leader that Iris had to make some bumps and bruises that she is today, I said, you know what? I'm quitting. And I resigned without a job in place. And I said, Rasheeda, believe in yourself, because you're going to get replaced. I mean, you're going to replace that income. And they're just going to step over the dead body and keep moving. And they did. But man, did I make the right move for my career. I just wish I would have known that earlier. And so for the women listening today on the call, I would say, believe in yourself. And the first time you feel disrespected in a place that you are, you make the move and believe that you have the calling to take your work somewhere else where you can be appreciated. I wish I would have knew that a lot earlier in my career. I'd be a lot further.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that, and that is actually a lesson that I learned early on. I've said before that I'm probably one of not a lot of Black women who had a mother who was in corporate America and who was a corporate executive and who was laid off in the 80s when I was in college. And that taught me the lesson that that corporate America is not loyal. And that was a really good lesson for me to learn, because that positioned in my mind the fact that I had to always be my best advocate. I had to always look out for number one. I wasn't going to be fooled into working for a company, 19 years and then being put out. So the tactics that I used to have a voice at the table are the same tactics that I used to be very nimble in my career. And they were taking care of my education, making sure that as my career progressed, I identified what I needed in terms of professional development and education in order to get to the next level of my career. And then making sure I got both the education and the experience to prepare me along the way. And when I got the education and I got the experience, then I demanded the next level. And if I didn't get it where I was, I left for it. So, I was one of the people who was changing jobs every 3 or 4 years because that's what was good for me. And that was my priority. The other tactics, again, going back to, performance, you have to be credible in your job. You have to do a good job each and every day. So that was one of my tactics, show up, do the best job, and make sure everybody knows that you did that. You did that. And don't be ashamed or afraid to take your credit for the work that you do. And then this whole idea, as Madam Graham mentioned, around having those sponsors. Who is the person with the power? I'm always, and I learned that early on, your mentor is the person who you go to for advice. What should I take as the next step? What are the opportunities that are open to me? How do you think I should maneuver? The sponsor is the person who's going to sit in the room and actually pick you up and move you into your next job. And so making sure that I had sponsors, making sure, even in the job that I'm in now, I wouldn't take this job unless I reported to the CEO. Because I understand the power of knowing the people with the power. And those people will take care of you. So those were some of the tactics that I used to have both my voice heard, but also to support where I wanted to go in my career.
Well, this particular area has been very interesting, and I'm looking in the chat, and obviously everything that's being said is resonating with the people on this Zoom. I mean, they're typing buzzwords, I'll just call them that for now: over mentored, underfunded, know your worth, believe in yourself. I hear you, Madam Graham. Take the work someplace else, somewhere else. And team lunch is more than just lunch. It's networking. Yes, genuine connections. So it seems as if, and of course, somebody has a question and at the end, if we have time, we'll let you ask questions. But I do see where, I guess, again, in summary, those buzzwords: connections, vouching, believe in yourself, trust, taking a position, make your goals clear, be ambitious, go above and beyond just the role of your job, being a team player, learning, but making sure that you are teachable and being able to relate to your superiors. And as we move on, we have one other area that we would like to cover that was brought up. And that is, we talked about barriers. We talked about tactics or best practices that all three of you have used in your careers. And and it's obvious that we have not 3 generations, but 3 people who have are successful currently, but have different pathways, but it's a new day. Jade is in a different position than Madam Grand, as well as Iris, and she has something probably to offer to younger women, because the paths that she's taken may be different than what the paths were back in the 80s and the 90s and even early 2000, a different decade. So in that case then, can you please share with us, ladies, what some of those fears were that you had as you were progressing through your career, and how did you overcome or conquer any fears that you had? And I would like this time to start with Dr. Cumberbatch, then Jade, and then ending with Madam Grant.
Thanks, Dolores. And, as I think back over my career, the fears that I had at different periods were really rooted in a lack of confidence on my end in what I knew. And so, my undergrad is in journalism and communications. And so but I always worked in financial services, on Wall Street, in investment banking. So in very sort of financial type businesses. And I take in accounting and finance and economics in undergrad, but I didn't really have that expansive education in financial services that I felt would allow me to be credible and really understand what I needed to understand in order to do a good job. And so, that fear of sort of showing what I didn't know was a big fear early in my career. And the way that I addressed that was to go back and get my MBA. So once I had that, then I knew that I knew what I knew, right? And everybody else knew that I knew what I knew too. So overcoming that fear was a big part in giving me the confidence that I needed. And I was promoted a matter of weeks after I got my MBA, because as I was getting it, I was able to demonstrate that I had learned what I needed to learn for the next job. Later in my career, when I started to work for CEOs and I realized that they were coming to me for advice and counsel around questions of leadership, I decided to go back to school and get a PhD in leadership and in managing change, because that is what they were coming to me for. So again, my fear of not being able to appropriately support the CEOs who I was working for led me to again pursue that education that would then let me come back into my job and apply what I'd learned to the benefit of my boss and my company. So my fears, I think, were really around having confidence in my knowledge base, and I overcame them by getting smart and educated about what I needed to know when I needed to know it.
Okay, next. Jade?
Sorry, had to unmute myself. I would say that my main fear was that I wouldn't be taken serious because of my age. I am of a different generation. The majority of the people on my team, a lot of them have been analysts for years. And not just on my team, but just in banking in general. So I definitely felt like I had to prove myself and prove that I was capable of the work that I was given. And banking and finance is also an industry dominated by white males. So as a young Black millennial female, I was definitely fearful about how I'd be perceived and how I would fit into the company culture. However, I did make it my mission to get those fears out of my head and not let them hold me back. So over time, I think I was just able to gain more confidence in my skill set and who I was and what I brought to my team. And that's kind of how I was able to overcome those fears.
Okay, Madam Grant.
Yeah, I would say that I believe early on my fear was also just probably not feeling that I would be taken seriously as well, just as an African American female. I had another complexity. I was a single mother very young, and had to work through what that looked like. So, oh, my child is sick, or I need to take care of that. So, a little bit of, oh, that was a stereotype. No one cared that I was previously married. They just assumed the story, if you know what I mean. And so I really had to kind of fight through those barriers as well, just being a young mother in corporate America too. I would say also another big barrier was I have always been extremely extroverted, um, very jovial, very joking. I like lighthearted moments in serious situations, but sometimes it wasn't always the most appropriate. And so I had to learn when to turn it on and when to turn it off, because it was a barrier. I see Jay keep popping up. I think her mute might be off on.
Sorry.
Okay, there you go. And so I think also the biggest, I would say, really the fear that I had was getting into new role. It's that learn and be curious part that Iris referred to. You put me in a new role, I'm like, I don't know how to do it. I'm not skilled at it. Why are you putting me here? You're trying to make me fail. Will I be good enough? That I had to deal with a lot. And I think the biggest thing that I just even went through in my career, I've been in finance since 1991. So I've been a finance through several different companies. And just recently, I was asked to go with our finance head at my company. I almost said his name, finance company. I'm his business partner for a recruiting strategy, specifically around DEI, as well as finance talent, executive talent, and bringing them into the company and developing that strategy. Well, now you're asking a finance person for 30 some years to go recruit more finance big heads. I don't have recruiting skill. I recruit, I interview, I do these things, but it's like I don't know. I'm not a recruiter by trade. But now Rasheeda Liberty sitting in HR of a business. Imagine that. I mean, people would freak out from my previous career. But it's another thing where I had to learn and be curious on my feet. And I said, when God tells you to walk on water, you better walk, because the greatest learning is in that murky water. And so I have had to do that in several times and been, be fearful while doing it, but I did it. So um, even being in the role of Grand Baptist is a little bit like that, to be honest with you. Never did it before, but here I am, right? And I think that is those constant tests that we go through and those fears that we're not good enough or that we may fail. But man, if you actually are successful and win, that's going to get you even more empowerment. The comfort zone is not the way to greater heights in your career.
Well, that's one word I'd like to end on right now, at least temporarily, and that's empowerment. DeAna, I know we have some questions in the chat, and maybe you could read off one by Tanya. Do you see that particular one? Because I see it right here.
Yes, I have it in front of me. So the question from Tanya is, how do you let them know without it being interpreted as bragging? And sometimes it can be interpreted as being a turnoff. So basically, how do you let them know without it being interpreted as bragging? How do you let them know that you are worthy and that you can actually do this job? And if we can start with Jade, Iris, and then Madam Grant.
Okay. Yeah, you said, so the question is, how do you let them know that you are worthy of the position that you're in?
Exactly.
I would say for me that is the assumption when they hired you. I feel like that's something you prove start to prove during the interview process. Here's my skill set, here's my experience, here's what I can bring to the table. And then of course, as you're in the role, just prove by your performance, as the ladies mentioned earlier. So that's how I would answer.
So I would say that particularly as Black women, because it's countercultural for us, right? A lot of the times we're raised not to brag, not to, bring attention to ourselves. And these are the exact things that we have to learn how to do in order to be successful in corporate America. So I think part of it is just acknowledging the fact that this is different for us than the way we were raised. And then I think the second thing is we have to understand who needs to know what we're doing and why. And so I think a big piece of how you go about, I'll say, tooting your own horn, but it is letting them know what you do and what your value is deciding who needs to know and how you let them know. And there are any number of ways to let people know the value that you're bringing. That whole going to lunch thing. You go to lunch and you sit next to the person who needs to know what you've been doing, and you ask them what they're doing, and then you tell them what you're doing. That's one way to let people know. You figure out what forums are important to making sure that your work is known. So when I went to the job that I have now, I'm responsible for corporate affairs. So I have government relations, I have public relations, I have community outreach, corporate social responsibility, I have corporate communications, CEO communications. And I decided that my work was important to the company's future, so important that the board should hear about my work. And so I asked my boss for time on our board meeting agendas, and we established a constituent relations committee. And I made sure that not just my peers, but our board was informed every quarter of the work that we're doing. The same can be said, I go or send people who work for me to meetings all over the company to share with our colleagues what we're doing and what we're accomplishing. So you have to be creative, but first you have to be bold and self-assured enough to believe that the work that you do matters and people need to hear about it, and then to figure out who those people are and how to get yourself in front of them.
And I will say too that I'll give you an experience that I had. I called into a conference call line. This was before we're in the virtual world. You had to call in to do skip level meetings. And so skip level meaning your boss's boss. And I heard one of my boss's peers on the phone with the senior director by accident, because I called into the call line too early. And I heard him telling him, next year, I don't want to be doing the same thing. I have done this, I have done that, I have done this. And I heard the senior director saying, no, well, we'll give you XYZ. And he said, no, that's not large enough scope for me. That would just be more of the same. I'm not going to accept that. We need to be, I need something bigger. And here are the things that I think you should give me. And I'm sitting there on the call like, oh, this is how they do it. Right? If you remember a long time ago, there was a Saturday Night Live skit where certain people a certain color would get up early and they would go to the bank and just carry all the money out the bank. Do you remember that skit? And then people would go, how do they keep getting so much money? Because they woke up early to go get the money. But what that taught me was they're asking for it. They're demanding it. And they're being very clear on what their successes are, and they're not going to hide them. And that's when I started saying, well, my one-on-ones, I'm going to show up with my success stories, what I've been able to deliver, and I will never leave a call with a senior leader without them being obligated to do something for me. I'm going to ask for something. Now, it may be another job. It may be a scope project. Hey, I'm looking to get here, so I would like to work on this. Or I know you don't have this job yet, but I would really like a job. I actually write up the job PRFAQ, right? I will write it up and say, this is a job I think I want. Maybe it's something we can build out in a couple of years. You have to demand it and ask for it in a nice way. But you have to notice what Delores said at the beginning of the call. Credibility. What Iris said, do your job. Those are the basics, and continue to learn and be curious. If you are not consistently learning, if you're not doing your job and you're not a credible leader, you can't go demand anything. But people will open that door and you begin to build that trust where you can have those conversations. So I don't look at it as bragging rights, but I look at it as, hey, you were able to win because of what I've been able to deliver. And therefore now I earn the right to tell you what I expect next and how you're going to help me get there, leader. I'm asking you for something.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. Great and valuable information. I can say that I'm personally learning a lot from this conversation. Another question that we have in the chat is, how do you move from being, quote unquote, the worker bee? How do you move from having that worker bee title to having a position of leadership and having your voice heard at the table? And if we could start with Madam Grant, Dr. Cumberbatch, and then Jade.
Yeah, I would say worker bees turn into the best kept secrets in departments. What that means is that boss will say, you are I can't let you out. I can't let them know about you. And you become just a support and band-aid for that leader. And so you have to figure out, I think, back to those conversations that Iris said, who's making the decisions? Who are the people I need to be connected to? I think people fall in love and get loyal with a boss and a team, but no one cares more about you than you and your development path. And so with that, you have to get that cheerleader in the room, the person that is the peer of your boss to also see you. And then another peer of your boss to see you. And then sometimes talk to so-and-so in the hall, walk past their office, say, hey, you want to go to do lunch? Or I saw you working on this. You have to sell yourself outside of the boss that smothers you because you're doing such a great job. I think this happens to us because as Black women, we take care of stuff. We take care of our boss, we take care of our children, we take care of our parents, we take care of our husband, our boyfriend, significant others. We are caretakers naturally, so we're going to make that leader look great. But in making that leader look great, you're going to keep getting work shoveled at you, and they may even throw a little money at you, but you won't have a voice at the table until you demand that voice by breaking out of that. Continue to do your work, but you got to sell your talents across the table.
And I'm going to build on that, Rasheeda, because research shows that the most important decision that you make in your career is who you work for, who you select as a manager. And again, that's a lesson that I learned early in my career, because exactly as Rasheeda said, you will have some managers who will do everything they possibly can to keep you in that seat because you make their life easy. And then you will have some managers who believe in developing talent and letting you go to grow into the professional that you are going to be. You always want to work for that latter person. And you almost never want to work for that first person, because it can be incredibly hard to get out from under somebody who is committed to keeping you where you are. So I think it's really important to, as you are going into jobs, to interview your potential manager and to have that conversation and to have it honestly. A good leader, when people ask me what are my potential, professional growth in this job, I have an honest conversation with them and I tell them, my hope and expectation is that you are not doing this job forever. If you're doing this job forever, we both have a problem, because I need you to grow and develop to bigger and better things, and you need to do that. So it's really important that we, particularly as Black women, select our bosses carefully. And I've been in interviews with people and been like, I would never work for you. You could bring Fort Knox here and sit it in the middle of this table, and I would not work for you one day.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what both Rasheeda and Iris said. And just to piggyback off of that, one thing, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when I came into my organization, I made it clear that I wanted to use this position as a learning experience for the next position, because the next position is a client-facing role, which is what I'm really passionate about. So making your attention, having a good manager that will listen to, you know, the path that you want to take and aid you on that journey, and then making it known exactly, or not, maybe not exactly, but having some sort of idea what's next for you. So I try really hard not to be super comfortable staying in this position for a long period of time. I have a certain amount of time that I see myself doing the work that I'm doing now. And like I said, I have an idea of what's next for me. So yeah, mastering what I do now, aligning myself with the people that can get me to the next step, and yeah, just going from there. So yeah, I agree with what both of you all said.
You're muted.
Thank you. It looks like we have time for one final question that was in the chat from Kendra. So Kendra, let me know if this question has been answered already. We kind of touched upon it, but her question was, even after you have expressed your interest, you've expressed your qualifications, you know you are the most qualified person, how do you get people to acknowledge that? It seems as though she's still being overlooked, even though she's expressed, she's done all the things that you ladies have suggested. Is there any other advice that you can possibly give her in this particular situation? If we can start with Jade, Iris, and then round it out with Madam Grant. Thank you.
This is just my personal opinion. I'm not telling you to do this. Again, I'm very new to all of this. But sometimes people just won't hear you. And like Iris and Rasheeda mentioned earlier, you can't be loyal to a company that's not loyal to you. You know, corporate is not a loyal world. So if you have to, you know, take your talents elsewhere, maybe that if you've exhausted all options, maybe that is the next option. And again, that's just my opinion. So I'll pass it on to the ladies to see what they have to say about that.
I agree with Jade. You know, you have to be able to be brutally honest with yourself about the role that you have and the company that you're in. And I think sometimes, you know, we can romanticize or make excuses for jobs and bosses because we want to think the best of people or think the best of places, or you know, we want to believe that people will treat us like we would treat them. And I'm here to tell you, half the time that's not the truth. At least half the time that's not the truth. And so we have to be really brutally honest with ourselves in our careers. And we have to stay, my biggest piece of advice would be stay on top of your career. You know, get yourself in the habit of being comfortable making change in your career if you have to, in order to get what you want. For decades now, I have been in the habit of checking out my resume every 3 months, because in the back of my head, I always want to be ready if I have to jump, right? I don't want it to be a surprise. I don't want to have to now feel burdened that I got to pull my resume out and do something about it. No, my resume is up to date at all times. And that sets my mindset that I can and I will move if I have to. There's no hesitancy there. I'm always going to be ready. So my biggest piece of advice would be to adopt that mindset about your career that says, I'm gonna manage my career like nobody's business. I'm gonna be on top of it. I'm gonna review where I am every 3 months. I'm gonna take stock. I'm gonna decide when I need to move, when I need to ask for something that I want, when it's time for me to change roles, and how much time I'm gonna give them to meet my needs. Because I'm going into it deciding that half the time they're not gonna do it and I'm gonna be ready to act. So that's the biggest piece of advice I would leave you with. Manage your own careers because your life and your livelihood depend on it.
Yeah. I am 100% with Iris and Jade. No one cares more about your development than you. And so I just believe that you shouldn't have to beg people to accept what you have to offer. It just, you keep being put into a space of, no, I want to stay with this company. But that's the jump sometimes that we need to take. What I say is if you can't get those sponsors, if you can't get those hall file monitors that would tell you the real reason why you didn't qualify for the job. And I want us sometimes to look introspective too, because I have some young in career leaders that have joined me through a program. I had like 25 interns, and all of those interns, by the time they were 3 months in the summer, thought they could have my job. So there is also some level setting that has to happen as you don't really have the experience to be a consultant. You really haven't worked but 1 year out of college. You don't have an experience. So there's a reality check there too to make sure that you are level setting on what you really have delivered. Because sometimes we can believe in ourselves too much and we're not listening to why we didn't get the opportunity. The second piece is if you say, no, I'm actually qualified. I meet all these qualifications. And I always tell people this: tenure doesn't dictate promotion. I don't care how long you've been in a job. Actually, that may actually be a detraction because you've been in the job too long. You really haven't moved. You haven't shown me that you're really learning and being curious about new things. You're not exploring new things. You're just, I've been at the job for 10 years. I deserve a promotion. Just because you sat there doesn't mean that you deserve a promotion. You haven't done anything different. I don't need to pay you different because the role only pays this, right? That's it. The role is this title and that's all it pays. So I don't pay you more because you've been there longer. So those are some things like we have to also check ourselves. But if you checked all those boxes, I wrote an article once for a publication called Knowing When It's Time to Leave. I had a mentor. I tell this story. I had a mentor in the media industry, and I know we're running short on time. He came as a volunteer on his own dime to my job to interview all of the people that were around me to just kind of get the hall file. And he took me to dinner that night, and I'll never forget it because he said, "You can bring your daughter too." And I was like, "Oh, somebody's like supporting me and my baby, you know." And we went to the nice restaurant, and he said, "You know what? You got to get out of here." He said, "Everybody said you're doing your job. You're great, but no one has a plan for you." And I remember just driving home from that dinner that night, just crying, just feeling so disappointed because everyone thought I did a good job, but nobody had a plan for me. No one had a plan for me. And fast forward, he was a catalyst to me leaving Wisconsin and moving to Nashville because not only did he do that, he called his connections and he got me a job. But that was a story of I was doing a great job, but nobody had a plan for me. And the only thing that made me change and move and kind of get going was because my hall file monitor came back and said, "You got to get out of here. You got to take your talents elsewhere." He kind of nudged me. Now it's up to you. You want to stay? You can stay. And I probably would still be in that same job right now. 20 years in the job saying, "I need them to promote me." They had no intentions of doing that. So just know when it's time to leave.
Absolutely. And I'll even put a finer point on that and say, that sounds like a sad story. You're doing your job and nobody notices you and, nobody has a plan for you. But when you take control, you realize that the best possible plan for your career is the plan that you establish and that you manage and that you keep on the tracks. Nobody is going to have a better plan for you than you're going to have for yourself. So the best thing you could possibly do is picture and map out your career. And it doesn't mean that it's going to go exactly the way that you plan it, but it means that you have the vision for your career and you have the various plans that will get you to where you want to go. And when you manage that, it's almost impossible for you to fail.
Did we lose DeAna? Where did she go? Okay, well, I think we might have lost her somewhere, but I want to say that this has been an awesome discussion. We only have about 4 minutes. You know, we're kind of a stickler here for time, and we believe your time is valuable. And everybody here, I believe, has learned a lot and could possibly incorporate a lot of the information that we have heard tonight in your own professional journey. So I want to thank everyone for sharing your insights with us that were on the panel. And I'm going to turn it over to seasoned sister Carolyn M. Williams for some final words. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. First of all, thank you to our powerful panelists. Thank you, Madam Grand Basileus Rasheeda Liberty. Thank you, Dr. Iris Cumberbatch. And thank you, my beautiful, wonderful, always going to be growing godchild, Jade Jackson. I am so thrilled. Can we give them a round of applause? Because I am sure by all the head nodding and the facial expressions that I saw, that this has been very powerful. They have talked to you about professional credibility. They've talked to you about performance credibility. They've talked to you about your interpersonal competencies, right? Know your worth, show up, grow up, and bring your game every day. Go and tell them you brought your game, and then tell them what you want to do next. When that job comes open, tell them that job has your name all over it. You are already doing that job. Keep that next job description on your desk. Always be working at your next level. Don't stay where you are. Stop getting coffee for the bosses unless that's really written in your position description and you get a percentage for doing it. It is not your job. Stop being the event planner unless your job is the event planner, right? Stop planning all the parties because then you become the party planner, all right? People want adults sitting at the table. People want decision makers. They want you to have critical thinking skills. This is our time. Everybody is looking for diversity and inclusion now. I have had more people say, I want to make sure we put a person of color in that job. So now is the time to go and say to somebody, I got next. I got next. And then get in the game, score, and go get your bonus. It is that simple. It's our time. And the other piece is the seasoned sisters are here for you. We're here for you. We will have conversations that we think are valuable. We will have conversations about myths, salaries, how we're underrepresented, how do you get promoted, what your support system should look like, how to get your game up, inclusion, leadership, mentoring, allyship, mistakes made at the table and how you recover from. We are here for you in all of that. So thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I want to thank Delores and DeAna for being such fabulous moderators. And I have to let you all know that Aaliyah is in the background handling the tech. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hey.
All right. Ladies, we are going to say goodnight to you. And if all of our panel members could please stay on. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.